Now, we heard this morning from a government minister, not necessarily with direct responsibility in the hydrogen area currently, but now let's hear from a shadow minister. Bill Esterson, MP, I better get the title right because it's always changing, Shadow Minister for Business and Industrial Strategy. He's going to speak for a few minutes and then he will take some questions, so please keep them coming in.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you everybody for being here this morning. I should start by just asking, are there any West Wing aficionados in the audience? Looking around, we got one or two. Okay, so when Jed Bartlett's successor is being planned with the run-up to the election, the Republican and Democrat candidates in the primaries actually have to go to Iowa, to the caucus there, and they have to make a pledge for ethanol. And in that ethanol pledge, they have to get up and say, ethanol is good for the environment, ethanol is good for the economy, and ethanol is good for Iowa. Well, we're not here to talk about ethanol, but I'm happy to stand here and make the same pledge for hydrogen, because hydrogen is good for the environment, hydrogen is good for the economy, and hydrogen, yes, absolutely has to be good for the UK, as we heard in that last session. And it's a critical part of our future in heat in industry. It's a critical part for transport, ultimately in aviation, and definitely in parts of ground transport too, buses and lorries and vans as well. And as we've been hearing, it's very difficult to see how you do all of home heat without the use of hydrogen. And in the UK, we are in an incredibly strong position, aren't we? We have many of the best technologies in the world in hydrogen and across the piece in energy. And actually, the stated aims and policies of government are broadly right. I don't think we as the opposition would disagree. The energy bill makes the right broad approach, but there's a gap. There's a gap between stated aims and policy implementation. You know, knocking the decision on hydrogen in home heat to 2026 after a general election is one of a number of examples. A lack of decision on licenses for carbon capture, a lack of preparation on pipelines and storage, and no decision making on the award of funding either, are all problems that we see as a government in waiting that we very much think need to be addressed to create that certainty for investors and create that certainty and long-term commitment for the industry. And I mentioned the energy bill. We don't think that putting additional costs onto consumers through levies is right. That's why we supported the amendment made to it in the House of Lords when it was in committee last week. The government overruled us in spite of the fact that Conservative members of that committee agreed with us that the right way forward is to look at government investment from the Treasury to support this vitally important industry. And that's very much the approach we want to take. We want to support the increase in decision-making, the improvement in decision-making on grid capacity and on energy infrastructure more widely too. And I'm afraid that repeated announcements, the repeat of what was in the budget on Green Day really helps no one. So that's the backdrop to where we're at. We have an economy in the UK where business investment is at a record low. We've seen gilt yields which went through the roof after the disaster of the mini-budget, and they're back up there again now, and everybody's paying the price for that through their mortgage payments, but that's true for industry too. We've got to turn that around. Absolutely crucial we do so, and part of the way you do that is by government making that commitment through government investment to attract private investment as well. And I'm afraid government ministers saying, as they do, that they want to watch what other countries are doing just isn't going to cut it. Somebody's got to lead. And right now, Germany, France, the European Union through the Net Zero Industry Act, and of course the United States through the Inflation Reduction Act and the vast sums of money on the table from the federal government are stealing a march. They are making those commitments. They are making that progress at speed on hydrogen and indeed across the energy sector. We have two stated missions that are relevant today. One is to grow the economy sustainably to be the fastest growing in the G7, and the second is to be a clean energy superpower. The second one is how you deliver the first one, of course, creating 500,000 jobs in energy, 500,000 jobs more in energy efficiency. And it is crucial that we deliver that clean growth sprint, that we are self-sufficient in electricity generation by ending that ban on onshore wind and doubling it, by trebling solar, quadrupling offshore wind, by investing in nuclear and getting nuclear projects up and running as fast as we can, and that's not fast because they take time, I accept that. By looking at the exciting opportunities in tidal and yes, supporting carbon capture and not seeing these delays continuing, working on that grid connection that at the moment is holding up the pipeline of projects. Because of course, as and the previous panel touched on this, what we generate through wind energy is also how we get to generate hydrogen ultimately as well. So it is about a whole renewable energy economy and a whole renewable energy approach and supporting a range of technologies. Energy efficiency, again, hugely important in reducing usage and reducing bills whilst we develop the alternatives to gas for heat or electric heating for some people too. And we have some good practice around the country actually that we can draw on. In my region, the Liverpool City region, we've just taken delivery of 20 hydrogen buses built at Wrightbus in Belfast, supporting domestic supply chains, supporting the UK economy in doing so. We're part of the HyNet cluster in the north west, putting hydrogen into industry and producing industrial heat. And of course, the northwest is where much of the renewable electricity generation is happening already and will continue to happen as we grow it. And I want to talk about transition. Keir got this right for me the other day. He was talking to GMB. And he made the comparison with what happened in the coalfields in the 1980s, where communities were just abandoned. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of workers and their families were just left to fend for themselves. There was no transition. There was just a cliff edge where people were left to fend for themselves. There are better examples of transition, the transition from town gas that the previous panel was talking about. And we have to get this right. We've got to take people with us. Because otherwise we will see resistance, we will see people refusing, and we will see real problems in the transition. It's not good enough just to say to people that the planet needs this to happen. People have got to see the immediate reasons why we've got to invest in a switch to low carbon, and we've got to see a switch to hydrogen. And that is an education piece. It is something that central government, and only central government, can play a part in setting the agenda, but it is something that the whole of society, the whole of the industry, and I agree that local government has a part to play in this, really has to work on to take people with us. We've got to take communities with us, so they're not resistant to imposition with things like hydrogen village trials. We've got to take the workforce. It's really, really important that there is a just transition for the oil and gas industry, and that the workforce there see the opportunities for good, well-paid jobs in renewables, offshore, and in areas like hydrogen as well. And we've got to take consumers so they see the benefits, and we've got to take the investment community with too. And our agenda is the Green Prosperity Fund, to put that public sector commitment in to attract that private investment. It's an industrial strategy so that government is working with industry, with the trade union movement to make sure we get the policy offer right, that we have the relationships going into government, and that we can implement policy effectively and efficiently. And if we do that, we have a chance of making the most of the opportunities that we have available to us. And that public investment is how we attract the private investment. It is, alongside decision-making, how we demonstrate stability and confidence and long-term commitment. And by the way, I think it's crucial that if, as looks increasingly likely, Labour is in office next year, we implement our industrial strategy. The test of that success is, yes, it's about us implementing, but I think it's about the long term of delivering it across multi-parliament, but also cross-party, and creating a consensus that industrial policy has to be about that partnership, the role of the state working with the private sector. And I think that's where we will get the success. But there is an immediate need. I recognise, Claire, what you were saying about just how things have to change now. And we will continue to make this case to the existing government for partnership, to address the delays, to deliver the improvements in decision-making in areas like planning and decision-making on connectivity for the grid, following the evidence of what is needed, supporting with that public money and private investment that is crowded in the commercial application of these fantastic technologies that we see. And we have to support across the economy too. I was at an event last night and the point about pipelines and storage was made to me, but it was also about the need for steel to make the new valves for those pipelines. We have to have a strong domestic steel industry. That applies right across our core industries too, by the way. But that means government using its powers of procurement right now to support our steel industry. We have two major steel plants. They produce 12% of industrial emissions at Scunthorpe and at Port Talbot, and they're part of the change. And we've got plans as a party for a green steel fund as part of that green prosperity fund to help them with the transition to electric arc and ultimately, yes, to hydrogen where electric arc as a technology doesn't work. But unless we have that capacity, it's going to be so much harder for us to deliver the domestic supply of key components in the switch to renewables and the switch to hydrogen in particular. So I don't think we can afford to sit and wait and see what others do. I think we are in a strong position to lead. Carl, you said there's a decision to be made. I agree with you. And I think that decision has to be, we have some of the very best tech in the world, we have some of the very best conditions for electrolyzed hydrogen because of our climate and the wind and increasingly the amount of sun that we have in this country. And we have the best places, one of the best places in the world to store carbon capture for part of the development of hydrogen and of other technologies too. In fact, we're uniquely placed as a country, aren't we? Now, I want this to be a long-term commitment cross-party, as I said, but I can only really influence what Labour's going to do. We have that industrial strategy. We published it in September. We want to work with the business community. We want to work with the trade unions. And we want to deliver this because I think this country can be a leader in hydrogen. Someone's got to be first. Why not the UK? Thank you. I'll come and join you.
Oh, see. Bill, thank you very much indeed for that. Can we get a bit specific? You could be in power inside a year or so.
It could be a few weeks the way things are going.
All right, it could be a few weeks.
Has anybody else resigned while we've been sat here?
No one's resigned, but if anyone missed the news, the recommendation of the committee was that Boris Johnson should be suspended for 90 days, which was a lot, and they're going to debate and vote on it on a free vote on Monday. Anyway, back to when you're...
I shan't tell you how I'm going to vote, but...
back to when if you're in power. You said you support the broad thrust of government policy. So what would actually, particularly from the point of view of hydrogen, what would change?
Oh, look, it's about speed. It's about making decisions. I mean, it was this point about decisions have got to be made. And that applies to licence awards, it applies to home heat. Look, we are very enthusiastic about the need for blended hydrogen in home heat. But we've also got to be realistic here. We've really got to make decisions on priorities, because how long is it going to take us to scale up hydrogen production? So absolutely for industrial heat, absolutely for some parts of transport, and then we've got to work out a plan. But I think the key point for me is around public funds. Public funds from the Treasury that make that commitment, that enable technologies to become commercialised, that attract the private investment, that act as the assurance and deliver the confidence to our investment community.
Would you, for example, take that decision on home heat before 2026?
Probably depends when we're going to get into government. But look, we are going to have to take decisions quickly. It's why my colleagues and I are gathering the evidence. It's why when we get in, I think very quickly we are going to have to make announcements right across the piece.
So you'd have to speed up the planned timeline.
I don't see how you can wait as long as that.
And you were talking about, your belief in hydrogen, the West Wing style. Where do you think that hydrogen is going to come from? Because as you know, we were hearing in that earlier session about the level of demand if things work out well for hydrogen in heating and elsewhere.
Yeah, and initially, some of hydrogen is going to come from converting from hydrocarbons. That is much more feasible in the short and medium term. I accept that. That's why carbon capture is such an important technology, and why it's so important we support that. But ultimately, we want to get to the point where green hydrogen is where we're getting our hydrogen from, using excess wind and solar, which then means you have to have the scale and capacity in nuclear and potentially tidal, as well as your base loads. So it is a combination, I accept that.
And what about the grid, the network of supply? What's your sort of vision for that?
Well, it is speeding up. I mean, there is a very significant challenge. I mean, I think there's some interesting opportunities in increasing battery storage, in using solid state technology, as well as producing hydrogen from excess wind and solar. But fundamentally, you've got to get the grid capacity in place in order to turn the wind farms on to generate the excess wind for hydrogen. So it is right up there. And again, public investment is crucial to deliver that ability and that capacity.
Now, you talked about the energy bill and your opposition to the hydrogen levy. In government, would Labour reverse that?
Well, when people are paying so much in energy bills, and industry's paying this huge amount for electricity in particular, I mean, we have this absurdly high cost of electricity compared to our international competitors, it cannot make sense to put additional costs on already very high bills. I mean, I keep hearing from businesses who are just not able to survive domestically or compete internationally, where you've got businesses that are producing products within an international group. The parent company is choosing manufacturing. We were hearing about ceramics last night at the event I was at. The parent companies are choosing to make them overseas and ship them here because it's cheaper than making them here because of our high costs of electricity and gas. And so levies are just going to add to that problem. And again, they're not attracting private investment. So Treasury and public money to invest is key in delivering that private sector investment.
But it does raise the question of where support for the industry would come from, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
If you're not collecting that revenue.
I haven't followed your question, Adam, sorry.
Okay. All right then. Yeah. How would a Labour government respond to the Inflation Reduction Act, the American Inflation Reduction Act?
Well, our plan for a Green Prosperity Fund predates IRA. Rachel Reeves announced it at the Labour conference in September 2021. So we almost sort of had our response to it in place already. But it isn't just about the public investment, the building up to 28 billion in the second half of a Labour government, which is the stated policy, the use of public money to crowd in private sector investment. It is also about partnering with the United States, which is why she was in Washington 3 weeks ago, talking to members of the Biden administration on how we partner, because in the end, actually, the Biden approach can't be an isolationist one. There has to be partnering internationally, and I think there is a recognition of that. And we've got to ensure that, especially given the overseas.
I mean, there was in the IRA there was a stronger commitment to green hydrogen, perhaps than some people were expecting, and obviously that post-dated your original rollout of the green plan.
Absolutely. I mean, they have their own hydrogen plan.
So what in your green prosperity plan, are you offering for hydrogen?
Yeah, and hydrogen is a key part of the wider energy mix. It's part of the clean energy superpower mission that we are in the middle of announcing at the moment.
What do you make of Grant Shapps saying that he didn't think that hydrogen was going to be significant in home heating?
Well, I mean, maybe we should ask his alter ego, Michael Green, whether he agrees, given the irony of the name. Look, I mean, it's very hard to see how you deliver home heat just with heat pumps. Much of our, and I agree with the previous discussion about energy efficiency measures being crucial, cutting bills, making more homes able to use heat pumps. But there are going to be properties where that's just not a practical
quite significant
approach. I think that's true. So, look, we are open to blended hydrogen as the next step in home heat.
And further down the line?
Well, yes. As with all our nascent technologies, crystal balls are needed. But look, I think there is a logic that says that hydrogen has an important part to play ultimately. I can't put a timeline on it, but I think ultimately that's true. So,
in terms of your policy decisions on decarbonising heat for 2026, how would you achieve that?
Decarbonising heat.
Mm-hmm. That's the question there.
Okay. Not entirely sure I recognise the question. I see. It's the government announcement. They're delaying it. Yeah. Well, it goes back to what we were saying before, which is that we're going to need to make a decision faster than that. I think. I mean, we've been making this point in the Energy Bill committee stage. My colleague Alan Whitehead, who leads for us, has made exactly this point that the government needs to make a decision and a commitment. Again, it's giving the certainty to the investment community and to the industry. So they do need to make that announcement.
You mentioned the experience of the hydrogen village in your part of the world. What do you think the lessons are from the hydrogen village?
Yeah, well, this is about taking people with, isn't it? I suppose there's an argument which says our friends from Keynote tried that and it wasn't the most successful approach. But ultimately, it is about making the transition attractive to people, and so attractive to people that they want to take part. We cannot afford for the energy transition, whether it's for heat in people's homes or people having an electric car or any other part of the low carbon transition, to be for the wealthy and the well off. At the moment, that's where we are. So how do we get around that, before you ask me that? the part of the Green Prosperity Fund is to support energy efficiency measures in homes, starting with the most energy inefficient, which tend to be those in the poorest parts of the country. It's got a regional growth aspect to it as well, which is what our industrial strategy points to. Similarly, with electric cars, we've got to use grants and low interest loans to help the car industry have the confidence to manufacture, but of course to enable more consumers to be able to buy. And we have to make these things attractive and available, and really support. But that education piece is crucial so that people understand it and really want to go for it.
And we haven't talked a great deal about transport. What do you see as the role of hydrogen in transport, and what would Labour do to encourage it, if indeed you want to encourage it?
Oh, very, very much so. And my colleague Steve Rotherham, the Metro Mayor in the Liverpool City region,
who we'll be speaking to after lunch.
He will tell you more about the 20 hydrogen buses he's bought from Wrightbus, I'm sure. It's a very strong commitment. I think we can look at the evidence of what Labour in particular is doing in local and regional government in this space. We can also look at where we will need to get to with aviation. I think there are transitional fuels for aviation and for parts of ground transport while we get there. Biodiesel or sustainable aviation fuel kind of goes back to my ethanol point, doesn't it? But ultimately, hydrogen has to play a really...
But there is a question here about the hydrogen refuelling network. I think we've got hydrogen refuelling stations in single figures. The Germans have got over 100.
Yep.
What would Labour do about that?
It's part of the government's role to build the infrastructure. Absolutely.
So Labour would build.
Well, if we're going to use hydrogen in transport, we've got to.
So that's a commitment.
Well, it's a commitment alongside developing the infrastructure more widely in low carbon energy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so finally, if you're someone involved with the hydrogen sector and you decide, I'm going to determine my vote in the next election on the basis of what is offered by the various parties, what would you say that Labour offers that present government doesn't?
Certainty, confidence for investors, a long-term commitment. We're not going to keep chopping and changing. We'll make the decisions. We'll put the public money on the table to attract the private investors. Hydrogen's got a hugely important role to play in this country, as indeed it's essential for the future of the planet. And a Labour government's going to make that commitment. Someone's got to go first. Why not the UK?
Esterson MP, thank you very much indeed. I know you've got a train to catch, not a hydrogen one. And that is the moment where we're going to break. We will be hearing from Steve Rotherham this afternoon, and also a number of panels. So enjoy your lunch, and please come back for that promptly.